It was supposed to be just another rainy night. A single dad, a woman walking alone in the storm, one quiet act of kindness, and a door left open. But sometimes the smallest choices become the most life-changing, and sometimes the people we least expect become the ones we need most. Before we begin this unforgettable story, if you enjoy heartfelt tales that uplift and inspire, consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories that remind us all of the power of compassion, second chances, and quiet courage. Now get comfortable, because this story just might stay with you long after it ends. A single dad helped a crying teacher in the rain days. Later, her little boy whispered, "Hi, Dad." The rain was relentless that night. Sheets of water slammed against Daniel Parker's windshield as he drove his rusted Ford F-150 along a winding road outside town. His wipers strained, squealing with every pass, but the world ahead remained a gray blur. The clock on his dash blinked 9:47 p.m. late enough that Jamie would already be in bed, probably clutching his dinosaur nightlight waiting for the sound of Daniel's boots at the door. He pressed the gas a little harder, wanting nothing more than to get home, shower off the grease from the garage, and kiss his son goodnight. But then, through the wavering mist and rain, something caught his eye. A figure standing alone at the side of the road. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly before coming to a full stop. A woman. She stood near a rusted street sign barely illuminated by Daniel's headlights. Her coat, if it could still be called that, clung to her like wet tissue. Her hair, soaked and plastered against her face, glistened under the rain. She had one hand tightly gripping the handle of a small rolling suitcase which was now splashed with mud. Daniel lowered his window halfway, rain misting the edge of the glass. "Hey," he called. "You all right?" She didn't answer. She didn't move. He could see her eyes now, wide, unblinking, and red-rimmed. "I can give you a lift," he added, his voice gentler. "This storm isn't letting up anytime soon." She shook her head, a small, terrified shake. Daniel exhaled. He wasn't about to pressure her, especially not someone clearly in distress, but something gnawed at him, something deep and old. A memory, maybe. A moment he hadn't forgiven himself for. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said finally. "Name's Daniel. I live 5 minutes that way. You can sit in the back. You don't even have to talk." Still no reply. He hesitated, then reached into his glove box and pulled out a business card, Parker & Sons Auto Repair, and leaned out, letting the rain soak his arm as he held it toward her. "If you change your mind," he said, "that's me. That's where I'll be." He gave her one more look, a soft, uncertain one, then rolled up the window and started to pull away. He'd barely gone 100 feet when he cursed under his breath and stopped again. This time, when he stepped out of the truck, the rain hit him like a wall. He jogged back toward the figure boots sloshing through the puddles. She hadn't moved. "Look," he said, standing a few feet away, hands open. "Whatever's going on, you don't have to tell me. But I've got a dry place in the back of my property. You can lock the door from the inside. No one will bother you." She stared at him, and for a moment he thought she'd say no again, but then a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He took the suitcase without asking and walked back to the truck. She followed. The small converted tool shed at the back of Daniel's yard wasn't glamorous. A single cot, a small desk, a dusty bookshelf, and an electric heater, but it was dry. Safe. She stood in the doorway, dripping eyes scanning every corner as if assessing threats. Daniel flicked on the lights at her suitcase by the cot, then stepped back. "There's a deadbolt inside," he said, "and I'll leave you be. I've got a kid in the house, Jamie. He's 6. You don't have to worry about us." Still no words. He nodded, unsure of what else to say. "If you need food, just knock." He turned to leave. Then her voice, dry, fragile like paper crinkling in the quiet, broke the silence. "Thank you." He paused at the door, not looking back. "You're welcome." Later that night, as he sat in his living room sipping lukewarm coffee, he heard the faintest knock. Jamie had already fallen asleep, curled up beneath his Star Wars blanket, breathing softly. Daniel rose, walked to the door, and opened it. There, sitting on the porch, was a small plastic cup. Inside, a handwritten note on a crumpled napkin. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need a few days. Please don't tell anyone I'm here. Signed only with Emily." Daniel stared at the note for a long moment. No last name, no explanation. Just rain. And silence. And a woman with eyes too tired for someone so young. He pocketed the note, walked outside, and looked across the yard toward the small shed. The light inside was off. But for the first time in months he felt something flicker inside him. Not curiosity, not even concern, just presence. Someone else breathing in the silence of this house. And somehow that didn't feel so bad. The next morning arrived with a hesitant kind of light, the kind that filtered through gray clouds like an apology. Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug steam, curling up from the black coffee like a secret. Through the kitchen window he could see the small tool shed out back. Still quiet, no movement, no smoke from the little heater's vent. He glanced at the clock. 7:16 a.m. Jamie sat at the breakfast table silent as usual, spooning cereal with slow, deliberate motions. Daniel studied him a moment, messy blonde hair, a new bandage on his knee from yesterday's fall eyes that used to sparkle but now just watched. Carefully. Always carefully. "You sleep okay, buddy?" Daniel asked, even though he already knew the answer. A small nod. Daniel reached over and ruffled his son's hair. "We've got a guest out back. She's just passing through. Be respectful. That means no peeking through the window." Jamie didn't respond, but Daniel saw the way his eyes flicked toward the backyard. Curious. Always curious, even if he rarely said a word. By the time Daniel finished breakfast cleanup and stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The tool shed door was open a crack. He walked over slowly, knocking lightly on the side before peering in. Emily was awake. She sat on the edge of the cot, her damp coat now hanging near the heater. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose braid. She looked cleaner, but her eyes were still clouded, not with fear this time, but caution. "I brought some breakfast," Daniel said, lifting the tray. "Toast, scrambled eggs, and a banana. Nothing fancy, but it was warm." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks." He set the tray down on the desk and stepped back, giving her space. "I didn't expect to stay long," she said softly, not quite meeting his eyes. "You don't have to explain," he replied. "But if you need more than a day, that's okay too." She looked up then. Really looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, eyes cast to the gray sky. "Years ago, I saw someone on the side of the road. Old woman. I didn't stop, told myself it wasn't my business. Next day, her photo was in the paper. Froze to death." Emily's eyes dropped to the tray. Her hands trembled slightly. "I'm not comparing you to her," he added gently. "Just saying. Sometimes we get a second chance to do the right thing." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I won't be a burden, I promise." "You're not," he said, and meant it. He was about to leave when a quiet voice stopped him. "I'm Emily." Daniel paused. A name. Just a name, but it felt like something significant. "Daniel," he replied. "And the little guy with the cereal obsession is Jamie." A faint smile touched her lips for the first time. By noon, the drizzle had turned to mist, and the town of Maple Hollow began to yawn into its slow, weekend rhythm. Daniel worked in his garage replacing a carburetor for a neighbor's rusted Subaru. The radio played soft country in the background, not for him, but because it seemed to calm Jamie when he lingered nearby. Midway through reassembly, he noticed movement by the fence. Emily stood near the overgrown garden plot, sleeves, rolled-up hair tied higher this time. She was kneeling in the mud, pulling weeds, her fingers moving with practiced ease. He approached. "You don't have to do that." I needed to do something she said without looking up. Idle hands and all that. Wasn't expecting a house guest who volunteers for yard work. Wasn't expecting to be here. Daniel watched her a moment. There was something in the way she moved methodical, precise, like someone who needed control of something, anything, just to keep from unraveling. He handed her a pair of gloves from the shed. "Here, don't wreck your hands. They look like teacher hands." She froze. "How'd you know?" "Saw the way you held the coffee cup. With both hands. Like someone who's used to chalk, not engine oil." She let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. "I used to teach. Elementary. Before." She trailed off. Daniel didn't push. Before usually meant something too heavy to lift in a single conversation. That evening, Jamie wandered outside, his small feet crunching across damp grass. He stopped several feet from the garden, watching Emily and Caleb, who had joined her, and now sat cross-legged, drawing something in the dirt with a stick. Emily looked up, met Jamie's eyes, and smiled gently. "Hey there." Jamie blinked, took a cautious step forward, then another. Still silent. Caleb looked up. "Hi, I'm 5. What's your name?" Jamie didn't answer, but he bent down, found his own stick, and sat beside them. Daniel watched from the porch, hands tucked into his flannel pockets, his heart doing something it hadn't done in a long time. It lifted. Later, as the sun slipped behind the trees, Emily stood on the porch steps, mug in hand. "Your boy's kind," she said. "Quiet, but kind. He used to be loud. Then, after his mom died, he just sort of went quiet. Emily didn't say anything for a while. Then mine stopped laughing when we left Michigan. I don't know if I did the right thing, leaving everything, uprooting him. He didn't get a choice." Daniel nodded slowly. Sometimes the right thing doesn't feel good, doesn't feel fair, but it's still right. She looked at him, eyes full of exhaustion and something else. Hope, maybe, or the first glimmer of it. "Thanks," she said. "For what?" "For letting a stranger into your backyard." Daniel smiled. "You're not a stranger anymore." Emily looked down at her mug, her fingers wrapped tight around it. "No," she whispered. "I guess I'm not." Sunday morning arrived with golden light slicing through the blinds, casting long stripes across Daniel's living room floor. It was the kind of crisp autumn day people waited all year for, where the air smelled of leaves and firewood, and even the silence felt full. Daniel stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, whistling under his breath. Jamie sat at the table, sketching something in a notebook, tongue slightly out in concentration. Out back, Emily and Caleb were planting daffodil bulbs in the old garden bed. Daniel had offered to help, but Emily insisted on doing it with Caleb. He needs to see something grow, she had said. Daniel didn't argue. He understood the healing in that. Just as he was pouring syrup onto Jamie's plate, there was a knock at the front door. Firm, rhythmic, too familiar. He opened it to find Sally Carson, his longtime neighbor, and one of the few people who hadn't turned away from him after his wife passed. Mid-60s, sharp eyes, always in a cardigan, Sally had a sixth sense for trouble, and she rarely knocked without purpose. "Morning, Daniel," she said, stepping inside before he could answer. "Made cinnamon rolls. Thought I'd drop them off before church." Daniel blinked, then smiled politely. "Thanks, Sally. Jamie's favorite." Her eyes, however, weren't on him. They scanned the room, noting the extra mug on the counter. Then her gaze shifted to the backyard through the kitchen window, landing squarely on the unfamiliar woman kneeling in his garden. Her brows lifted. Company Daniel stiffened slightly. Just someone passing through. Sally crossed her arms. "Looks like she's digging in for the season. She's going through something. I'm just giving her a safe place to land for a while. And that little boy with her son. Caleb." Sally's expression shifted, softened just a hair. "Daniel," she said, lowering her voice, "you know, I respect you. You've been through hell and back, but you can't just take in strangers with kids and not ask questions. This is a small town. People talk." Daniel sighed. Let them. She hasn't done anything wrong. She's just scared. Sally leaned in. And you're not worried about Jamie about yourself? No, he said firmly. I'm not. Sally studied him, then exhaled. You've always had a savior complex, you know that, ever since you joined the fire department at 19. Still think you can fix the world with your bare hands. He met her gaze without flinching. I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm just trying not to repeat the mistakes I've made. That stopped her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she sighed. All right, I'll pretend I didn't see anything. But if you need help, legal, medical, moral support, you come to me. Got it. Got it. As she turned to leave, she paused. She's lucky you stopped that night. Daniel didn't reply, because deep down he didn't think Emily was the only lucky one. Later that day, Emily stood in the kitchen nervously wiping her hands on a towel. She had been hesitant to come inside, but Daniel insisted she use the shower. The water pressure's a little aggressive, but it'll do, he'd joked. Now, freshly showered and wrapped in one of Daniel's oversized flannel shirts, she looked more relaxed, but also more exposed. She's not wrong, you know, Emily said quietly, staring out the window. Who? Daniel asked from across the room where he was folding laundry on the couch. The neighbor, Sally. I heard her. Daniel looked up. You were in the shed. I was by the door. He nodded. I figured. Emily sat down on the edge of the armchair, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I don't want to bring trouble into your life. You haven't. You don't even know my last name. He shrugged. I'll learn it when you're ready. She swallowed hard. It's James. Emily James. He gave a small smile. Good to meet you properly, Ms. James. Her lips curved slightly. Then the smile faded. There's more. Things I should tell you? Daniel set the laundry aside, his expression serious. You can, when you're ready. Or not, but you're safe here. That's not conditional. A long silence stretched between them before Emily whispered, I left my husband 2 months ago. He wasn't violent, not in the way people think, but he broke things inside me, little by little. Daniel nodded slowly, his voice gentle. You don't owe anyone a justification for leaving pain behind. Her eyes glistened. He wants Caleb. He's fighting for custody. Says I'm unstable. That I ran. I ran to save my son from becoming him. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that's not running. That's surviving. That night, Jamie brought a small sketchbook out to the porch where Daniel sat reading. Without a word, he handed it to his father and pointed to a drawing. Daniel smiled. The page was filled with 3 figures himself, Jamie and Emily standing in front of the garden with Caleb waving a shovel in the air. She's good with the garden, Daniel said softly. Jamie nodded. Do you like her? Another nod. Then slowly Jamie whispered, She makes Caleb laugh. Daniel looked at his son, startled, not because of the words, but because he had spoken them aloud. It was the first time Jamie had spoken in over a year. His throat tightened. He reached out and pulled Jamie into a hug, holding him close. Yeah, buddy, she's pretty special. Inside the house, Emily watched from the window, her hands cradling a cup of chamomile tea. She saw the embrace, saw the way Daniel rested his cheek on his son's head. She didn't know yet what the next week or month would bring. But for the first time in a long, long time, she felt something close to peace. And peace in her world had always been the rarest kind of miracle. Monday morning crept in quietly, the kind of crisp autumn day that carried both the bite of chill and the breath of promise. Daniel stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Jamie sat at the table silently lining up blueberries on his plate like chess pieces. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the house, mingling with the faint scent of rain-soaked leaves drifting in through the open kitchen window. Out back, Emily and Caleb were already up. Daniel could hear muffled laughter from the garden, followed by Caleb's unmistakable oops, and a splash that suggested muddy shoes were now the price of curiosity. Daniel smiled to himself. He hadn't heard that kind of laughter out back in years. Not since before. Not since Jamie's mother was still alive and the air in this house felt warm even when it snowed. After breakfast, he drove Jamie to school. On the way, Jamie held his sketchpad, tracing lines with his finger lips moving soundlessly. Daniel glanced at him now and then, not wanting to break the silence. Silence with Jamie was sacred. But after what happened last night, those few words Jamie whispered Daniel dared to hope that more would come. He reached across the seat, gently squeezing Jamie's knee. "Proud of you, buddy." Jamie glanced at him, gave the smallest of smiles, and went back to his sketching. Back at the garage, Daniel spent the morning under the hood of an old Buick, but his mind kept wandering to Emily. Not in the romantic sense, not yet at least, but with a quiet, growing sense of responsibility. Or maybe it was connection. Whatever it was, it felt like something new was forming in the ruins of old pain. Around lunchtime, his phone buzzed. A message from the school secretary, Emily James, here to inquire about substitute work. Left your name as character reference. Daniel wiped his hands, stared at the screen, and smiled. She's trying, he thought. She's really trying. That afternoon, when Daniel returned home, he found Emily pacing on the porch, wringing her hands. Caleb was asleep on the swing with a blanket tucked under his chin. The garden behind him was dotted with tiny green buds, daffodils, stubborn and hopeful. "You all right?" Daniel asked. She startled slightly, then nodded. "Sorry, just nerves." "About the school, I haven't stood in a classroom in almost a year," she said. "And I'm applying as a substitute, which means I'll be jumping into chaos I didn't prepare for. I'm not sure I remember how to teach." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You taught Caleb how to plant an entire flower bed in 2 days. That counts for something." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Kids learn different things in gardens than they do in classrooms. Maybe. But they still learn from the person who's patient enough to kneel down next to them. Emily looked at him for a moment like she wasn't sure if she should believe him or if it would hurt more if she did. "The principal said they'd start me with a trial next week. One of the second-grade teachers is out for surgery. That's great. Terrifying." He shrugged. The good things usually are. The next morning, Jamie stepped off the school bus with a different energy. His steps were lighter, and his arms swung at his sides instead of clutching his backpack like a shield. Daniel watched him from the front porch, quietly stunned. When Jamie reached the porch steps, he looked up and said, clear as day, "We had a new recess aide today." Daniel blinked. "Yeah." Jamie nodded. She looked like Miss Emily. Daniel's heart kicked a little. "Well, maybe it was Miss Emily." Jamie looked thoughtful. Then he added, "Caleb didn't cry when he scraped his knee. She hugged him and said it was a brave scrape." Daniel knelt down to Jamie's level. "That's a good kind of scrape to have." "Do you think," Jamie asked slowly, "she could stay here longer? I mean..." Even after her trial, Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "I hope so, buddy." Friday came faster than anyone expected. Emily had spent the week preparing practicing lesson plans at night, organizing flashcards with Caleb at the kitchen table, asking Daniel questions about the school, the kids, and even Jamie's favorite books. The morning of her first official day, she stood in the kitchen wearing a neatly ironed navy blouse, her hair braided down one shoulder. Caleb held her hand as she adjusted the strap of her purse. "You look like you've done this 100 times, Daniel said. "I have," she whispered, "but never while being watched so closely by my past." He nodded, stepping aside to open the door. "Then make sure they see your future instead." That afternoon, Daniel waited anxiously on the porch as the school bus pulled up. Jamie hopped off first, eyes wide, and ran to him. "She was there," he shouted. Actually shouted. Daniel laughed, catching his son mid-jump. "Yeah, she read us a story, and she let us dance in line while we waited to go to art." And Jamie's voice lowered, suddenly serious. "And she smiled at me." Daniel's breath caught. "She smiled at me, Dad." At that moment, Emily appeared around the side of the house holding Caleb's hand. Her blouse was smudged with glitter and paint, and her face was flushed, but her smile, it was radiant. Daniel met her eyes, and in that unspoken second something passed between them. Not attraction, not yet, but something warmer, something that whispered, "We're building something here." Maybe without meaning to, but something real. That evening over dinner, Jamie passed Emily a folded piece of paper. She opened it to reveal a drawing, 4 stick figures holding hands under a sun. Caleb, Jamie, Daniel, and herself. A single daffodil bloomed in the corner of the page. She looked up, misty-eyed. "I've never been in a family portrait before," she said quietly. Daniel smiled. "Then it's about time." The weeks that followed unfolded like pages from a storybook Emily never thought she'd be part of again. Mornings filled with lunchbox packing and soft kisses on Caleb's forehead. Afternoons colored by chalk dust and crayon-smudged fingers. Nights warmed by quiet laughter around Daniel's kitchen table. Jamie had started speaking in full sentences, tentative at first, then with the unfiltered eagerness of a child remembering how to trust the world again. It was fragile, all of it, like glass held in trembling hands. But it was real. Then came Thursday. Emily stood in the teacher's lounge sipping lukewarm coffee, reviewing the seating chart for her second-grade class. The sun filtered in through the blinds, highlighting the dust particles floating in the air. Her thoughts were still wrapped around Jamie's recent breakthrough, how he'd raised his hand during reading time yesterday, how he'd made a joke that made 3 other kids giggle. She was so deep in thought she didn't notice the man standing in the doorway until he cleared his throat. Emily. Her blood froze. The coffee cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. He stood there, immaculate suit, expensive shoes, gold cufflinks. His face, still handsome in that curated, polished way, wore the same expression it always had, total control. "Richard." "Long time," he said, stepping into the room. "You look healthy." Emily stepped back instinctively, her breath shallow. "You're not supposed to be here." He smiled, that smirk she once mistook for charm. "Just visiting. Isn't that what parents do?" "You're not listed on Caleb's school file." He shrugged. "Doesn't mean I can't say hello to my son. He's not here right now. And you don't get to just show up." His voice dropped an octave, cold and low. "You're making this difficult for yourself, Em. If you'd just answer your phone, we wouldn't have to do this in public." Emily felt her legs trembling, but she stood her ground. "You want to talk? Talk to my lawyer." He took another step closer. "You don't have a lawyer. You're staying in a borrowed shed on someone's pity. You're a temporary problem in someone else's charity." The door creaked open behind them. A secretary peeked in. "Ms. James." "Everything okay?" Emily didn't take her eyes off Richard. "Yes, everything's fine." The secretary hesitated, then nodded and closed the door. Richard leaned in. 3 weeks. That's how long until the next custody hearing. And if I have anything to say about it, you'll be watching Caleb grow up from a court-mandated distance. Then, just like that, he turned and walked out. Emily didn't remember driving home. The road blurred. The air in the truck cab was thick. Caleb in the back seat chattered about his art project, unaware of the storm that had been reawakened in his mother's chest. When she pulled into Daniel's driveway, she didn't get out. She sat behind the wheel hands, gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. Daniel appeared in the side mirror, wiping his hands on a rag, stepping toward the truck with concern etched across his face. She rolled down the window. He came. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Who, my ex?" "At the school." He took a sharp breath. "Did he touch you? Threaten you?" "No. He didn't have to. Just being there was enough." Her voice cracked. "I thought I had more time. I thought we were safe here." Daniel opened her door, reached in, and gently placed his hand over hers. "You are safe here." "I don't think that's true anymore." That night, Emily packed. Daniel found her in the shed, folding Caleb's clothes into a duffel bag with shaky hands. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "He found us, Daniel. You don't understand. He has money lawyers, people who believe him. He knows how to look good in front of judges. Daniel leaned against the door frame. And you think leaving will make you harder to find. I think staying makes you a target, she whispered. You and Jamie. I've brought this chaos into your home. You didn't bring chaos. You brought life back into it. Her eyes filled with tears. This isn't your fight. He stepped forward. Then let me choose to fight it anyway. Her voice trembled. Why? Daniel hesitated. Then with more honesty than he'd shared in years, because helping you, watching you heal, watching Jamie and Caleb smile again, it's the first time in a long while I've felt like I'm doing something good. Not just surviving. Living. Emily wiped her cheek, still unconvinced. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. A friend of mine. He's a family attorney. Retired, but still sharp. I called him today, told him your situation. He wants to help. She stared at the paper like it might burn her. I can't pay him. He doesn't want payment. I don't know if I can win. Daniel softened. But you won't lose. Not if you keep showing up. Silence filled the shed. Then Emily whispered, Okay. Later that night, Daniel checked on Jamie. The boy was asleep, clutching a drawing in his hands. Daniel gently pried it free. 4 stick figures stood under a glowing sun like the previous drawing, but now a 5th figure hovered at the edge. Larger, shadowy, frowning. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then, folding the paper carefully, he whispered, We're not letting him in. The shadow had returned. But this time it had walked into the wrong backyard. And, unlike before, Emily James was no longer alone. The courtroom was still 2 weeks away, but Daniel could already feel the tension settling over the house like a winter fog. Every movement was quieter now. Every laugh more tentative. Jamie had gone back to drawing darker shapes, stick figures with walls between them. And Emily, though she tried to act normal, had started sleeping with the lights on in the shed again. But what haunted Daniel most was the look in Caleb's eyes. That quiet kind of fear. The kind children carry when they sense something wrong, but no one's told them why. Daniel wasn't a man of many words. He believed in doing, not just saying. So when he drove into town that Monday morning, he wasn't headed to the garage. He was headed to Frank Whitmore's house, retired attorney Warhorse in a cardigan, and someone who had once helped Daniel settle his wife's estate when grief made thinking impossible. Frank opened the door slowly, his eyes narrowing under his thick white brows. If you're selling anything, make it bourbon. I'm buying, Daniel said, holding out a coffee thermos. Frank took it, sniffed. Black, burnt, terrible. Just how I like it. Get in. Inside, the house smelled of dust paper and pipe tobacco. Daniel laid out Emily's situation as clearly as he could. No dramatics, just facts. Frank listened, nodding occasionally, scratching at a yellow legal pad with the same pen he'd probably used since the Carter administration. Custody cases get ugly, Frank muttered. Especially when the other side has resources and charm. He has both, Daniel said. But no heart. That won't help in court unless we can prove it. What do we have? Police reports, medical records, witnesses. No charges were ever filed. He's careful. But I think I can get a statement from Emily's old friend. She saw the emotional abuse. Frank leaned back in his chair, chewing the inside of his cheek. We'll need more than anecdotes. Judges want stability, proof of routine environment, income, community standing. Daniel nodded. She's working at the school. Temporary, but with strong feedback. She and Caleb are living on my property. Not formally, but I was hoping Frank held up a hand. Make it formal. Daniel blinked. What do you mean? Put it in writing. A lease, even if you charge her $1 a month. Give her legal residence. Then help her set up utilities in her name. Mail. Something that paints permanence. Judges eat that up. Daniel hesitated, then said, Can I gift her the shed? Frank raised his eyebrows. You sure it's not much, but it's a roof, and it gives her standing. Frank whistled. You're all in on this. Daniel's voice dropped, because no one else ever was for her. That evening, Daniel handed Emily a manila envelope. She opened it, slowly frowning. Inside, a copy of a property deed signed, notarized, and stamped. "You're the legal owner of the shed now," he said softly. "It's yours." Emily stared at the papers, blinking as though they were written in another language. I don't understand." Daniel sat across from her at the kitchen table. "Frank says this gives you standing, stability. It's what the court needs to see. And it's what you deserve." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "Daniel, I can't take this. I don't want. You're not taking anything. You're building something. A life. A future. For you and Caleb." Her voice cracked. "You've done enough. You've already given too much. I haven't given everything." "Not yet." She looked at him, then really looked past the flannel shirt, the grease-stained fingers, the stubble he never quite managed to shave right. And in that moment she saw not just a man offering help, but a man choosing to help, fully aware of the weight that came with it. "Okay," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're standing up." The following day, Emily and Daniel visited the county clerk's office. She registered for a new mailing address, signed up for a library card, picked up a voter registration form, though she wasn't sure if she'd ever be brave enough to use it again. Later, they stopped by the school. Emily handed in her application for full-time employment, her hands trembling as she did. "Trial's going well," the principal said with a wink. "The kids adore you. One of them said you smell like sunshine and markers. That's the highest compliment we give around here." Emily laughed, covering her mouth like she wasn't used to the sound anymore. That night, Jamie brought another drawing to Emily. 4 figures stood together again, but this time they were surrounded by tiny green sprouts. Daffodils just beginning to bloom. In the top right corner, Jamie had written, "Home." Emily traced the word with her fingertip. "Jamie," she said gently, "did you draw this for me?" He nodded. "It's beautiful." He looked at her, then his eyes round and quiet. "You smile more now." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's because you make it easier." She reached out and hugged him, and this time he didn't flinch. He leaned into it. Later, Daniel stood outside under the stars, sipping tea. Emily joined him, quietly wrapped in a shawl. "They think I'm brave," she said, voice low. "But most days I feel like I'm still running." He nodded slowly. "Maybe. But now you're running towards something." She looked at him, the stars reflecting in her eyes. "Why are you doing all this, really?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because for a long time I thought my story ended when my wife died. But then you showed up, in the rain. And I realized maybe I was just between chapters." Emily's eyes shimmered. "I don't know what happens next." Daniel smiled. "Neither do I. But I think we're both brave enough to find out." And for the first time in years, they both stood there not as broken people, but as builders of something quietly, beautifully new. The courthouse in Maple Hollow wasn't grand. It didn't have marble floors or polished columns, just a squat brick building with faded flags and a rusted bell that hadn't rung in years. But to Emily, it might as well have been the Colosseum. She sat outside on the worn wooden bench, her fingers wrapped tightly around a thermos Daniel had handed her before they left that morning. Her hands trembled slightly more from memory than cold. Caleb sat beside her, his small hand resting in hers, swinging his legs without worry. He didn't understand yet. Not fully. All he knew was that today adults would be talking about him and that his mom looked tired in a way he couldn't fix. Daniel stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't shaved, said he wanted to look like himself. Raw, real protective. Emily was grateful for that. She didn't need polish beside her. She needed someone who wouldn't flinch when the world snarled back. Frank arrived right on time, still carrying that same yellow legal pad and coffee in a styrofoam cup. He gave them both a nod and led the way through the double doors. Inside the courtroom was quiet and plain. A wooden crossbeam of sunlight sliced across the floor from the high window, catching dust in the air like snowfall. Richard sat at the other table, perfectly composed. His lawyer, a woman in a sharp gray suit with a designer bag, whispered something to him. He nodded and straightened his cuffs. His smile, when it turned toward Emily, was small, knowing, rehearsed. Emily's stomach twisted. The judge entered, an older woman with stern eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't waste time. After a brief introduction, she turned to the matter at hand. Ms. Emily James is seeking to retain primary custody of her son, Caleb James, age 5. Mr. Richard James is contesting, citing concerns over stability, living arrangements, and emotional fitness. The air in the room thinned. Richard's lawyer went first. She painted a familiar portrait of a mother on the run, without permanent housing, without income, with emotional instability, and no official custody arrangement. She referenced Emily's erratic behavior, her unverified employment, and her questionable romantic entanglements. Emily sat still, her hands clenched in her lap. But Daniel watched her knuckles go white. Then it was Frank's turn. He stood slowly unfolding himself like an old tree waking up. Your Honor, he said what you heard sounds compelling until you examine the actual truth. He laid out Emily's new lease, her employment letters, her performance evaluations, testimonials from the school principal and fellow teachers. He presented Caleb's drawings, innocent, uncoached pieces of truth that said more about his safety and happiness than any expert could. Then he stepped aside, and Emily stood. She didn't have a prepared statement. She hadn't rehearsed. What she had was memory, and a voice that shook but still rose above the silence. Your Honor, she began, I don't stand here because I'm perfect. I stand here because I made a choice to protect my son. Not from bruises or broken bones, because those heal, but from the kind of wounds that live inside that teach a child love is something earned through fear. She glanced at Richard, who leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. I wasn't always brave. I stayed longer than I should have. I let him make me small. I let him twist my thoughts until I didn't trust my own instincts. But when Caleb looked at me one night and asked why Daddy never smiled when I talked, I knew it was time. She paused, breath-catching. I didn't run because I'm unstable. I ran because I'm finally stable enough to say, this is not the life I want for my child. I have worked hard to build something new. I'm not perfect, but I'm present. I'm steady. And I'm safe. The courtroom was silent. Even the dust hung still in the sunbeam. The judge leaned forward. Ms. James, are you currently residing in stable housing? Yes, Your Honor. I own my residence legally gifted with utility accounts and mailing address in my name. And your employment, Maple Hollow Elementary. Substitute with full-time consideration pending. I work with students with special needs and trauma histories. The judge nodded slowly. Then she turned to Richard. Mr. James, do you have any documented evidence of emotional instability or risk to the child? His lawyer opened her mouth, but the judge raised a hand. Not insinuations. Not character attacks. Evidence. A pause. No, Your Honor. Richard said, voice flat. After a brief recess, the judge returned with her decision. In the interest of the child's emotional well-being and demonstrated stability in the care of Ms. James, this court awards her continued full custody. Mr. James will have supervised visitation rights pending review in 6 months. Emily exhaled so sharply she startled herself. The gavel fell like a thunderclap. It was over. Outside, Emily leaned against the stone wall of the courthouse, breathing in the October air like it was her first breath in months. Caleb played with the fallen leaves at her feet. Daniel stepped beside her, quiet. You did it, he said. She shook her head slowly. We did it. No, he said gently. You stood up. You told the truth. That was all you. She turned to face him. Her eyes were red but shining. I don't know how to say thank you for all this, for standing with me when it wasn't convenient, when it could have cost you something. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "You never asked me to save you. You just needed someone who wouldn't walk away." She reached for his hand. He didn't let go. And behind them, Caleb tossed a leaf into the air and laughed full and loud and unafraid. It sounded like freedom. The first week after the custody ruling passed like a gentle storm, soaked in relief but edged with quiet tension. Though Emily had won full custody, the clause-pending review in 6 months sat like a pebble in her shoe. Small, but always there. Daniel noticed it in the way she checked the mailbox a little too often. In the way she jumped slightly when the phone rang. In how her smile, though brighter now, still carried something guarded at the edges. But she also changed in other ways. She rearranged the bookshelves in the shed, hung up Caleb's artwork on twine with clothespins, bought a lemon-scented candle and lit it every evening, letting the soft flame warm the corners of her new home. The shed didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt like she had exhaled into it. Caleb bloomed like spring. He laughed more, slept deeper, his drawings filled with suns and rocket ships instead of gray skies and fences. And Jamie, sweet, quiet, Jamie was right beside him. The two boys had become inseparable, an unlikely duo of light and shadow learning how to play in color again. One Saturday morning, Daniel found them huddled behind the garage with an old toolbox trying to build a treehouse out of scrap wood and sheer determination. It was crooked, missing half a wall, and the ladder leaned like it had secrets. But when Jamie looked up and shouted, "We made this together," Daniel felt something tighten in his chest and then release. He hadn't seen his son claim anything as his in years. At school, Emily's temporary role slowly morphed into something more permanent. The principal had watched her build trust with students who hadn't spoken in months. One child with selective mutism had started humming during reading time. Another had begun writing letters and slipping them into Emily's desk, each ending with thanks for being soft. On a Wednesday afternoon, she was called into the office and offered a full-time position starting the next semester. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't ask about pay. She just said yes. That evening, Daniel grilled steaks while Emily set the table outside under a string of warm lights he'd hung the weekend before. The boys were sprawled on the grass racing snails they'd named after superheroes. Emily handed Daniel a beer. "I got the job," she said softly, like she almost didn't believe it. Daniel looked at her stunned for only a second before grinning. "I knew you would. I didn't. Well, good thing you've got me around to believe twice as hard." She laughed, really laughed, and it felt like watching the last puzzle piece click into place. One cold Sunday in November, Daniel brought Emily to the local hardware store. He didn't tell her why. They walked the aisles in their coats, brushing past garden hoses and hammer sets until he stopped at the back wall paint swatches. "Pick a color," he said. She looked at him sideways. "For what? For your front door." "I don't have a front door." "You do now." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly reached out and touched a swatch called Autumn Ridge, a deep, calming green that reminded Daniel of pine trees and second chances. As the days shortened and leaves began to fall, Emily and Daniel settled into something that wasn't quite romantic, but wasn't just friendship either. It was quieter, deeper, a presence. Like two trees growing side by side, separate but intertwined at the roots. He didn't rush her. She didn't need declarations. They were building something that didn't require labels. But one night as they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets watching the boys chase fireflies, Emily leaned her head gently against Daniel's shoulder. "Sometimes I forget how to live in peace," she whispered. "Like I've worn chaos so long it's become my skin." Daniel didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "You're allowed to stop bracing for the worst. I don't know how. Then I'll remind you." Thanksgiving arrived with wind and golden leaves swirling down Main Street. Daniel invited Sally and a few of the neighborhood kids whose families had moved away or fallen apart. Emily cooked a pumpkin pie from scratch despite swearing she was horrific at baking. The pie turned out perfect. Jamie stood beside Caleb at the makeshift children's table, carving turkey slices with the seriousness of a surgeon. Laughter filled the backyard. Daniel glanced across the long wooden table and met Emily's eyes. She mouthed, "Thank you." He shook his head. "No," he mouthed back. "Thank you." That night, after everyone had gone home and the boys were asleep, Daniel walked Emily back to the shed. She turned to him at the door, her arms crossed to fight the cold. "These 3 months," she said, "I don't think I would have survived them without you." Daniel smiled softly. "You didn't survive them. You transformed them." She looked down at her hands. "I'm still scared sometimes. So am I. I don't want to lose this. Any of this. You won't." She stepped forward then, and for the first time let her arms slip around his waist. Daniel held her without hesitation, fitting her against him like a truth he'd been waiting to say out loud. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was a promise. A quiet, steady one. Later that night, Jamie padded into the living room in his pajamas, holding a drawing. Daniel smiled and took it. 5 stick figures again: Daniel, Jamie, Emily, Caleb. And now a new one. A small house with a green front door. Above it, Jamie had written in careful block letters, "We don't just visit here. We belong." Daniel folded the drawing, slowly pressed it to his heart, and turned off the light. "Yes," he thought, "we really do." Winter crept into Maple Hollow like an old friend with cold hands and quiet steps. The air smelled of wood smoke, and wreaths began appearing on porches. Daniel had always loved December, the stillness, the soft promise of snow. But this year it carried a tension he couldn't name. Emily had begun to smile more easily, laugh without catching herself. Caleb's cheeks were permanently rosy from recess snowball fights, and Jamie had started humming while brushing his teeth. But healing, Daniel knew, could be fragile. And peace wasn't something you locked in and kept. It had to be earned again and again. The first sign something was off came in the mail. Emily stood on the porch flipping through envelopes when she froze a thin white envelope trembling in her hand. Her name typed in capital letters. No return address. Daniel stepped outside. "What is it?" She opened it slowly. Inside, a copy of a court summons. Richard had filed a new motion for emergency custody. The grounds alleged endangerment of the child's well-being, citing her cohabitation with a non-relative male guardian of unknown character. Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. Daniel took the paper, reading, quickly, jaw tightening with every line. "He's trying again," she whispered. "He's twisting this everything we've built into something ugly." "He's desperate," Daniel said low and measured. "He's throwing darts in the dark." But the words didn't comfort. Not when the threat was real. Frank came by that night, still in his cardigan snow, dusting his shoulders. He skimmed the documents and shook his head. "This is weak," he muttered, "but not harmless. Emergency filings go to judges who don't know the full history. It's a gamble. But if the wrong person picks it up even temporarily, it could affect visitation." Emily sat at the table silent, her fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of untouched tea. Daniel paced behind her. "What do we do?" "We respond. Quickly. Calmly. No panic. I'll file a counter-motion with a character affidavit for Daniel, a record of Emily's employment, and a report from the school counselor on Caleb's development." Frank looked at Emily. "We'll also need to address the cohabitation claim." Emily's face flushed. "I don't even live in his house. I have my own residence. He gifted me the deed. It's legally separate." Frank gave a short nod. "Good. That helps." Daniel stepped closer. "What else can we do?" Frank hesitated. "There's one more angle. Richard's been quiet about his own history, but if we can find documentation of emotional abuse or prior reports, we can undercut his credibility." Emily swallowed. "He's too careful. I never called the police." Frank looked at her gently. "But maybe someone else did. The next day, Emily drove 2 hours north to the town where she and Richard had lived during their early marriage. Her hands shook on the wheel. Caleb stayed with Daniel giggling as they built a snow fort in the backyard. But Emily was driving toward ghosts. At the town's family services office, she gave her name and waited. An hour passed before a woman in a gray cardigan called her name. There was one report, the woman said, flipping through a manila folder. From a neighbor. Anonymous. She said she heard yelling a lot of it. Doors slamming, a child crying. No charges were filed, but the report exists. Emily's heart thudded. Can I get a copy? You can request one. Might take a few days. I don't have a few days. The woman studied her. You're the mother, right? And you're fighting for custody. Emily nodded. The woman hesitated, then slid a paper across the desk. I can't give you this, but I can leave the room for 5 minutes. Emily stared at her. Thank you. No need to thank me, the woman said softly. Just win. That night, Daniel opened the shed door to find Emily sitting cross-legged on the floor, the report in her lap. Her eyes were wet, but there was something solid beneath the tears, something steeled. We have it, she said. Daniel crouched beside her. You okay? She nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time. Yeah, because I'm not hiding anymore. 2 days later, the court hearing for Richard's emergency motion began. Unlike the formal custody trial, this one took place in a smaller, colder courtroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Richard wore the same controlled expression, his lawyer rattling off allegations that Emily was living in a romantic and legally ambiguous situation, that Caleb was exposed to instability, that the environment was inappropriate. Then Frank stood. He handed the judge a series of documents, the deed to Emily's residence, her employment verification testimonials from her colleagues, a notarized character affidavit from Daniel, and the report from the family services file. The judge took her time reading. Then she looked up and said, "Motion denied." Richard blinked. The gavel fell again. Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Emily's hand found his under the table and squeezed. Outside, Emily stood on the courthouse steps, blinking up at the slate-gray sky. A few snowflakes drifted down, catching in her hair. I thought he'd always have power over me, she said quietly, that I'd always be one step behind him, waiting to defend myself. Daniel stepped beside her. He only had that power because you still believed you were smaller than him. I don't anymore. Daniel turned to her. That report, what it said. You could have buried that, pretended it never happened. But you used it, faced it. I used to think survival was silence, she said. But now I think healing is noise. It's saying things out loud, even the ugly parts. He smiled, especially the ugly parts. Emily looked at him, her eyes soft open. Do you think it's really over? Daniel shook his head, not unkindly. Not over. But you've changed the shape of the story. He's not the storm anymore? Emily laughed a small sound. Then, what am I? You're the shelter. She looked up at the sky again. The snow fell harder now, quiet but sure, and in her chest something settled. Not fear, not dread, but peace. Hard-earned, fiercely kept, and hers. December deepened in Maple Hollow, draping the town in blankets of snow that glowed golden under string lights and porch lanterns. The elementary school buzzed with preparations for the annual winter showcase, a hodgepodge of holiday skits, off-key carols, and proud parents clutching camcorders. It was the kind of event Daniel usually dreaded, the forced cheer, the crowded gym, the unspoken ache of watching other families whole and beaming. But this year felt different. This year, Jamie had a line in the second-grade play. Caleb was learning a dance that involved twirling awkwardly with paper snowflakes taped to his sleeves. And Emily. Emily had been asked to MC the event. She said yes, without hesitation. That more than anything told Daniel how far she'd come. On the morning of the showcase, Daniel helped Jamie knot a miniature tie while the boy babbled about stage cues and candy canes. His words tumbled over each other, excited and alive. "Hey, Dad," Jamie said, suddenly glancing up. Daniel stilled the tie halfway done. "Yeah, bud. Do you think she'll come tonight?" Miss Emily Daniel smiled gently. "She's running the whole show, remember?" Jamie nodded, his voice dropping. "Good. 'Cause when I say my line, I want her to hear it." The school gymnasium swelled with folding chairs and flushed faces. Parents huddled in coats, brushing snow from their sleeves, the scent of hot cocoa and popcorn thick in the air. Daniel sat near the front with Emily beside him, their knees nearly touching Caleb, bouncing on her lap. The lights dimmed. The principal took the stage and gave a short welcome before handing the microphone to Emily. As she walked to the podium, Daniel saw the way her breath caught for just a second. But then she smiled, steady, luminous, and began speaking with the warmth of someone who remembered what it was like to be forgotten. Tonight, she said, isn't just about twinkling lights or pretty songs. It's about small voices speaking up. It's about community. It's about belonging. Her eyes found Daniel's and lingered. He felt it like a quiet fire in his chest. Jamie's class was second to last. He stepped onto the stage with his classmates wearing a homemade crown made of tinfoil and cardboard. His part was short, 2 lines, maybe 3, but Daniel could see the way his shoulders straightened, the way he scanned the crowd until his eyes found the faces he trusted most. Emily leaned in. "He looks taller," she whispered. Daniel chuckled. "He looks braver." The spotlight hit Jamie. He stepped forward, gripping the mic like a ship's wheel. "My name is Jamie," he said, his voice echoing across the gym. "And this winter I learned something." He paused. The room stilled. "I learned that sometimes. Families don't always start the day you're born. Sometimes they start when someone shows up and stays." He turned his head slightly, looked directly at Emily. Then Daniel. "Thanks for being my family," he finished. "Especially my dad." The mic caught the gasp from the audience, followed by scattered applause. Daniel sat frozen, every breath lodged in his chest. Emily turned slowly to look at him, her hand covering her mouth. And Daniel, tough, reserved, slow to tears, Daniel felt his vision blur. The applause swelled, but Daniel heard nothing. Only the sound of his son calling him Dad. Really, truly, publicly, proudly. After the show, the crowd spilled into the halls. Children zipped past in costumes, parents hugged and laughed, and snow drifted outside like the world itself was pausing to listen. Jamie ran to Daniel and threw his arms around him. Daniel scooped him up, holding him close, pressing his lips to the boy's hair. "You meant that?" Daniel asked softly. Jamie pulled back and looked him square in the eyes. "I've meant it for a while. I just didn't know if you wanted me to say it." Daniel swallowed hard. "I've been waiting my whole life to hear it." Nearby, Emily watched them with eyes like glass catching candlelight. Caleb tugged at her sleeve. "Is it okay if I call him Dad, too?" Emily crouched beside him, her hand on his cheek. "If he says yes." Caleb turned and sprinted toward Daniel, nearly crashing into his leg. "Hey, Dad." Daniel blinked. "Yeah, buddy." Caleb grinned. "You forgot to zip your coat." Daniel laughed, tears mixing with snow as he bent to fix it. "Thanks, son." Emily stood a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest, shoulders pulled tight. Not because she was cold, but because something big was swelling inside her, too big for words. Daniel walked over slowly, Jamie on one side, Caleb on the other. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, eyes shining. I think I just graduated," he said, voice cracking. "From single dad to something else." She laughed, then reached for his hand. "You did good tonight." "They did good," he corrected. She leaned into him, forehead against his shoulder. "We all did." Later that night, back at the house, Daniel tucked Jamie in while Emily helped Caleb into his pajamas. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Daniel stepped outside for air and looked up at the sky. Stars blinked down, quiet witnesses. Emily joined him, wrapping a blanket over her shoulders. "I've never seen him that happy," she said. "Which one?" Daniel teased. "You've got two now." She smiled. "Both." A silence stretched between them, comfortable deep. "Jamie called me Dad tonight," Daniel said. But it felt like something more. It was. He looked at her. It felt like I wasn't alone anymore. She stepped closer. "You're not." Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. "Are we doing this?" he asked, voice low. Emily didn't flinch. "We already are." And under the starlit hush of a quiet town, she leaned in and kissed him softly, fully, without fear. It wasn't fireworks. It was something better. It was home. Spring returned to Maple Hollow, not with a bang, but a breath, a gentle warming of the soil, the lifting of gray skies and the soft bloom of daffodils pushing through the earth like small declarations of hope. Daniel stood in the backyard one Saturday morning, a steaming mug in hand, watching Jamie and Caleb chase each other between garden beds. Their laughter rang out in bursts, echoing against the fence, rising into the air like music meant only for him. The ground was still wet from a morning shower, but the sun had broken through, casting everything in a quiet, golden light. He took a slow sip of coffee and glanced toward the shed, now no longer just a shed. Emily had painted the front door autumn ridge green, and under the small overhang she'd hung a wooden sign Jamie had made in school. "This is where love lives." The old tools had been moved out months ago, replaced with shelves of books, a desk where Emily now wrote lesson plans, and a window box that Caleb had filled with wildflowers. They'd added insulation, painted the walls soft cream, and installed a tiny reading nook with warm lights and mismatched pillows. It wasn't big, but it was hers, and it was home. Inside the main house, Emily stood at the stove making blueberry pancakes, her hair in a loose braid and an apron Daniel didn't know she owned. The radio played something soft from the 70s. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon filled the room. Jamie wandered in and leaned against the counter. "Mom," he started, then paused, realizing. Emily turned to him, smile warm. "Yeah." He smiled sheepishly. "Sorry. I meant it's okay," she said gently. "You can call me whatever feels right." Jamie hesitated. "Can I call you both?" Emily's eyes softened. "Of course you can." Jamie grinned and slipped back outside with 2 pancakes on a paper towel. Emily turned back to the stove and found Daniel leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with that quiet awe she was still learning to accept. "Smells like a Saturday morning," he said. She tossed him a towel. "Smells like home." He walked to her, placed a hand on her back just above her waist. "You've changed everything." She tilted her head. "No, you gave it a place to land." Later that afternoon, they drove into town for the official dedication of the new community reading garden, a joint project between the elementary school and the local library. Daniel had donated tools. Emily had organized volunteers. The kids had painted signs, dug dirt-planted dreams. At the center of the new garden stood a plaque carved into weathered cedar, the Harris family garden, where hope grows. Emily traced her fingers over the letters. "I didn't know they were putting our name on it." Daniel chuckled. Sally insisted. Of course she did. Caleb and Jamie ran between the benches, handing out bookmarks with their teacher's handwriting on the back. "You are not lost. You are growing." As the sun began to dip behind the treetops, someone brought out a guitar. Another started a fire pit. Families gathered marshmallows toasted, and stories were shared under a sky slowly turning purple and gold. Daniel sat beside Emily on a low bench, a blanket around their shoulders, the boys nestled between them. "I didn't know life could look like this," she said quietly, head on his shoulder. He squeezed her hand. "It always could. You just never had anyone to build it with." She looked up at him. "I do now." He kissed her temple. "You always will." That night, after the boys had fallen asleep in the back seat on the ride home, Emily carried Caleb to the shed, while Daniel scooped up Jamie and took him to bed inside the house. When he returned, he found Emily sitting on the porch steps of the shed, her knees pulled up to her chest, watching the stars. He sat beside her. They didn't speak for a long time, just breathed, just were. And then Emily said, "I used to think love was a storm, big, unpredictable, something you endured more than enjoyed." Daniel looked at her. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think it's a shelter, the kind that shows up quietly and holds steady, even when the rain comes." He reached for her hand, laced their fingers. "We'll still have storms." "I know, but we'll face them side by side." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in both their lives, neither of them was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Neither of them was bracing for goodbye. They were home. In the quiet that followed, the moon rose pale and full, casting soft light over the yard, where 2 bicycles lay tipped in the grass and daffodils nodded gently in the breeze. Inside the house, Jamie stirred in his sleep and murmured, "Dad." In the shed, Caleb whispered, "Mom." And outside, beneath the stars, a new chapter was already being written, one that didn't begin with brokenness or end with running, but one rooted in staying and healing, in choosing each other again and again. Not out of obligation, but out of love. Pure, steady, patient love. The kind that takes you in when the world has left you out. The kind that rebuilds a life, one small kindness at a time. And that was their story, a story of healing, of choosing love over fear, and of finding home in the most unexpected place. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Did this story touch your heart in some way? Let us know in the comments. We read every one of them, and your thoughts mean the world to us. If you enjoyed this video and want more stories that lift your spirit and warm your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment. Thank you so much for watching, for supporting this journey, and for believing, like we do, that kindness still matters. We'll see you in the next story.